Hey you guys, Mimsy here. I bet you didn't know you had to train your drapery panel. In this video, I'm gonna show you how to hang, how to style, and how to train your drapes so they're always obedient to you. Okay, so here's a set of drapes in my girls' room, and I'm gonna show you a couple different ways that you can hang your drapes on a rod and rings. These are hung on drapery hooks. Which is my preferred method of hanging draperies. Now you'll see that these drapery hooks are installed in the header about 1.5 inches below the very top of the drape. If you looked at these, let me take out a couple more. Okay, so these two are installed, so these hooks are right at the top of the drapery panel, and actually they've settled and come down even further. But you'll notice the difference when I put this back on the rings, and these are just hooked over the ring. There's not even any of those little eye hooks on these rings. These are just cheap plastic rings, and I just hooked them. So these here are the ones that are installed about 1.5 inches underneath the top. So, okay. So you see the difference here? These are the ones that are installed, the hook is installed down here. These, the hook is installed right at the edge, so it's right at the edge. And you see how this one is lower and hangs with the drapery, the top of the drape, the top of the fabric below the ring. So you can see the full ring exposed, where this, when I put the drapery hook lower, you don't see the ring anymore, and you don't even see the rod really. So that's two different ways you can do it, and it just depends upon the way that you like it to look. Let me give you one more thing about this method. So with this, when you close your drape or pull your drape back, the spaces, which is the spaces between the two pleats, when you have it installed below the ring, your spaces tuck back underneath the rod. They tuck back nice and neatly, and so when they're gathered together, all you see are the pleats. So it looks nice and neat because it's just the pleats. When you have it like this, where your fabric is over your rod, when you gather this up, your spaces can't fit underneath because the rod is there. So your spaces are forced to poke out in between your pleats. So you see how there's a pleat, you close it and that space pokes out, there's a pleat, close it and that space pokes out, and a pleat. It just makes, when your drapes are open, it makes it a little less uniform and a little less neat looking. So that's why my preference is to have the rings showing, the hooks right at the top of the fabric, so that your spaces can tuck back underneath. I like the way that looks better. It's neater than this. So just a tip or a pointer when you're installing to determine where you're going to put your hooks. If you want the tucks to, or if you want the spaces to tuck back nicely under your rod, you want to install your hook close to the top so that your hook comes right to the top of the drape. Okay, once your draperies are constructed and you've got them hung on your rod and rings and determined where you want your drapery hooks to be, and if you want your top of your drape to cover your rod and your rings, or you want your rod and your rings to show, or if you're hanging them on a hospital track, or whatever. If you're going to do a shirred drape, then there's really not much styling. You just put them on the rod and you're done. But when you have a header with pleats in there, or even a serpentine header like this, or sometimes called a ripple fold header, you want to style your drapes once they're up, because when you hang them, they're going to be all willy-nilly. This is going to be all willy-nilly. These drapes are actually quite trained because I had them up for years and they stayed in the same position for a very long time. So these are actually pretty trained. But when you get your drapes up, you need to train them and style them. And the way that you do this is you push them all back so they're stacked back, and then you want to get in behind your drapes. And starting at the top, you want to get your fingers in the pleat and push that pleat out and push the space back. Push the next pleat out and push the next space back. And go all the way across, and you're going to want to work from top to bottom, making sure that your pleat is pushed out and your space is pushed back. Otherwise, you're just going to have a real messy look here, especially when you get down to the bottom. And when you get down to the bottom, it gets harder and harder to do this, but you want to make sure that at least the top half of your drapes are styled nice and neatly. So you push the space back and your pleat out all the way across and work your way down. And just keep it gathered in your hand that's behind the drape. So keep that gathered, work that, gather it and hold it with your back hand, gather it and hold it with your back hand. And then once you get that nicely trained, you see how I've got nice pleats here and the spaces are all tucked neatly in between. You're going to take a piece of fabric, and I have just a sheet that I ripped up into about a 5-inch wide strip. And now, because remember this one is 2 separate pieces, if I were going all the way across here, if it was one, I would go all the way across. So you're going to take this strip of fabric and just loosely tie it around your drape, so that it's tied and everything is pleated nicely inside of there. And you may want to raise that up a little bit, push that back. Just make sure that your pleats are nice and tucked, and then move down your drape and do the same thing down a little further. And it's going to get a little bit harder as you go down your drape, but you're going to do the same thing down there and take another one and tie that off here. And depending upon how long your drapes are, you may want to do this 2 or 3 times. And then just make sure you're still from that spot where you're tied off. Just make sure you have the same pleating going on all the way down your drapery panel, so that your pleats and your spaces are the same all the way down. And then just leave it. You see how nice and neat that is? Leave that, and then you would want to go down to the bottom third of your drape, do that, and tie one at the bottom. And you're going to want to leave your drapes like this for a week or so, 2 weeks if you can. And then, you know, don't be opening them and closing them the first couple days. And if you don't have time to leave them training like this, go ahead and get out a hand steamer and steam them like this. A lot of drapery workrooms will actually pleat them like this and then hang them on a hanger pleated like this. And that's why sometimes when you see newly hung drapes by a workroom, they're like creased right here. So if that's the case, you want to steam out that crease. You want it to be a nice fold but not creased. So that's how you train and style your drapes. And if you leave them like this long enough and train them well enough, then they're always going to stay nicely pleated for you. Even when you're opening them and closing them, they'll stay this way. When you open and then close them all the way back, they'll be nicely pleated. So that's how you do it.